The reservation came in at exactly 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, and Harper Hayes nearly dropped her phone when she saw the amount. Someone had just booked every single table in her jazz bar for Friday night, prepaying the full amount plus a generous tip that matched the entire bill. She stared at the screen of her decade-old laptop, refreshing the page twice to make sure it was real, that her struggling business bank account was actually showing those numbers. "This has to be a mistake," she muttered, reaching for her phone to call the number attached to the reservation. But before she could dial, another notification popped up. The same person had just booked every table for the following Friday, and then another notification. Every Friday for the next month. Harper's Jazz Bar, the Blue Note Hideaway, was tucked between a laundromat and a pawn shop in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely called transitioning. The place sat 40 people if she squeezed them in tight, with mismatched chairs and tables she had refinished herself after buying them from estate sales. The stage was barely big enough for a quartet, and the sound system was held together with electrical tape and prayers. But it was hers, every struggling inch of it, and she had poured the last 5 years of her life into keeping it alive. And now some mysterious benefactor was single-handedly keeping her afloat. That first Friday, Harper arrived 3 hours early, anxiety twisting her stomach into knots. She had called the number 17 times over the past 3 days, but it always went to a generic voicemail. She cleaned tables that were already clean, rearranged the small bar area twice, and changed her outfit 3 times before settling on her usual black jeans and a dark green blouse that her best friend swore brought out her eyes. The musicians arrived at 7. She had booked Davy Chen and his trio, solid players who could make even the emptiest room feel alive. They set up while Harper paced behind the bar, watching the door like it held all the answers to her future. At 7:30, the door opened. A man walked in alone, and Harper felt her breath catch. He was tall, over 6 feet, with dark hair that looked professionally styled but slightly wind-messed in a way that suggested he had walked here. He wore a charcoal suit without a tie, the top button of his white shirt undone, and moved with the kind of easy confidence that came from never having to prove anything to anyone. "Welcome to the Blue Note," Harper said, stepping forward with her professional smile firmly in place. "Are you meeting someone?" "Just me tonight," he said, and his voice was warm, almost apologetic. "I have a reservation." "You're the one who booked all the tables." "I am." He extended his hand. "Xavier Easton." She shook it, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested he did more than push papers despite the expensive suit. "Harper Hayes, I own this place." "I know." His smile was genuine, reaching his dark eyes. "Your music selection is impeccable. I have been wanting to visit for months." He chose a table in the back corner, the one with the wobbly leg that Harper had been meaning to fix for 6 months. She winced as he sat down, but he did not seem to notice or care. He ordered a whiskey neat and settled in as Davy started the first set with a mellow rendition of Autumn Leaves. Harper spent the entire evening trying not to stare. Xavier sat alone at his table, listening with an attention that made her wonder if he was a critic or a musician himself. He did not pull out his phone once. He did not seem bored or lonely. He simply listened, occasionally closing his eyes, his fingers tapping subtle rhythms against his glass. The bar was eerie with only one customer. The musicians kept glancing at the empty tables, at Harper behind the bar, at the man who had bought out their entire night. But Xavier did not seem bothered by any of it. Between sets, he ordered food, the jambalaya that Harper made from her grandmother's recipe, and complimented it with such sincerity that she found herself blushing. At 11, When Davy played the last notes of the final set, Xavier stood and approached the bar. He paid his tab, left a tip that made Harper's eyes water, and thanked her for a wonderful evening. "Will you be back next Friday?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Every Friday," he said. "If that is all right with you. You are paying for every table. You can do whatever you want." Something flickered across his face, an expression she could not quite read. "Then I will see you next week, Harper." He left, and Harper stood in her empty bar, surrounded by vacant tables and the lingering notes of jazz, wondering what the hell had just happened. The pattern continued. Every Friday at 7:30, Xavier Easton walked through her door, sat at the same wobbly table, and listened to jazz for 3.5 hours. He always came alone. He always ordered whiskey and jambalaya, and he always left a tip that kept Harper's struggling bar afloat for another week. By the third Friday, the musicians were comfortable with their strange one-man audience. Davy even started taking requests, and Xavier revealed a deep knowledge of jazz standards that surprised them all. He knew the B-sides, the deep cuts, the songs that only true enthusiasts remembered. "Who is he?" Davy asked during a break, jerking his thumb toward Xavier's table. "I honestly have no idea," Harper admitted. She had Googled him, of course. Xavier Easton was the CEO of Easton Holdings, a commercial real estate development company that had turned several struggling neighborhoods into thriving communities without displacing the original residents. He was 32, a self-made millionaire who had started with a single property renovation and built an empire through what business magazines called ethical development with soul. He was known for his philanthropy, his refusal to do interviews, and his insistence on maintaining a low profile despite his considerable wealth. And apparently, he liked to spend his Friday nights in her tiny jazz bar. "Maybe he is in love with you," Davy suggested with a grin. Harper rolled her eyes. "He barely talks to me. He orders his drink, listens to music, and leaves." But she would be lying if she said she had not thought about it. Xavier was attractive in a way that made her stomach flip every time he walked through the door. More than that, though, there was something about the way he listened to the music, the way he closed his eyes and let himself get lost in the sound, that made her want to know everything about him. The fourth Friday, Harper made herself walk over to his table during the break. He looked up as she approached, and she saw surprise and something else, something warmer, flash across his face. "Mind if I sit?" she asked. "Please." He gestured to the chair across from him. Harper sat, suddenly aware of how nervous she felt. "I wanted to thank you again for your patronage. You are keeping this place running." "That is not why I come," he said quietly. "Then why do you? And why buy out every table?" Xavier was quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the rim of his glass. "I like the music, I like the atmosphere. And I am not very good at sharing spaces with crowds anymore." There was a story there, Harper could tell. Something in the way he said it, the slight tension in his shoulders, but she did not push. "You know a lot about jazz," she said instead. "My father was a musician, tenor saxophone. He played in clubs like this all over the city." Xavier's expression softened with memory. "He died when I was 15. I have been chasing the feeling of those nights ever since." Harper's chest tightened. "I am sorry. Do not be. He had a good life, a short one but good." Xavier met her eyes. "This place reminds me of the clubs he played in. Real music, real soul. Not some corporate jazz lounge with overpriced cocktails and people who come to be seen rather than to listen." "The Blue Note is definitely not corporate," Harper said with a laugh. "More like held together with duct tape and hope." "It is perfect," Xavier said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe him. Davy started the second set, and Harper reluctantly stood to return to the bar. But as she walked away, she felt Xavier's eyes on her back, and for the first time in a long while, she felt something other than stress about her struggling business. She felt possibility. The weeks blurred together in a rhythm of Fridays. Harper found herself looking forward to them with an intensity that both thrilled and terrified her. She started wearing nicer clothes, spending more time on her appearance, and immediately hating herself for it. This was not a date. Xavier was a customer, albeit a strange and generous one, and she was reading too much into his quiet presence and kind words. But then came the Friday when everything changed. It started with rain, the kind of downpour that turned streets into rivers and made the whole city smell like wet concrete and possibility. Harper was running late, her car refusing to start, forcing her to sprint 6 blocks through the deluge. She arrived at the Blue Note looking like a drowned rat, her carefully chosen outfit soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. Xavier was already there, early for the first time. He looked up as she burst through the door, and his expression shifted from surprise to concern. "Harper, are you all right? Car died," she gasped, dripping water all over her own floor. "Just fantastic. Do you have dry clothes here in my office, but they are just old jeans and a ratty sweater. Better than pneumonia." Xavier stood, and before she could protest, he had shrugged out of his suit jacket. "Here, at least get out of that wet top." She stared at him. "I cannot take your jacket. You can and you will. Go change. I will wait." There was something in his voice, a gentle command that made arguing seem pointless. Harper took the jacket, still warm from his body, and retreated to her tiny office. She peeled off her wet clothes, toweled off as best she could, and pulled on the old jeans and faded band T-shirt she kept for cleaning days. Xavier's jacket hung huge on her, but it was warm and smelled like cedar and something else, something distinctly him. When she emerged, Xavier had taken it upon himself to start making coffee in her ancient machine behind the bar. "You do not have to do that," she said. "You look like you need it." He poured her a cup, added cream without asking because somehow he remembered how she took it from watching her for weeks. "Rough day," Harper laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. "Rough month. Rough year, honestly. The car is the least of it." She did not mean to say more, but something about the way Xavier looked at her, really looked at her with those dark eyes that seemed to see everything, made the words spill out. She told him about the mounting bills, the equipment that kept breaking down, the booking agent who had stolen 3 months of her fees before disappearing. She told him about the struggle to keep the musicians paid, to keep the lights on, to maintain the dream her grandmother had planted in her head when Harper was just a kid learning to appreciate the complexity of a good bass line. Xavier listened without interrupting, and when she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you do it?" he asked finally. "Why not close down, cut your losses?" "Because this place matters," Harper said simply. "Jazz is dying in this city. Real jazz, in real venues where real people can afford to come and listen. Everything is getting corporatized or gentrified or just bulldozed for luxury condos. The Blue Note is one of the last authentic spots left in this neighborhood." "You sound like someone I know," Xavier said with a slight smile. "Yeah, me. That is how I feel about the buildings I renovate. Everyone wants to tear down and start over, but I think there is value in preserving what matters, in respecting the bones of a place and the people who built it." Harper looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something shift in her chest. "Is that why you come here? You are preserving the Blue Note?" "No," Xavier said quietly. "I come here because when I walk through that door, everything else falls away. Work, pressure, expectations. It is just the music and the space and you." The last word hung between them like a musical note, resonating in the air. Harper felt her heart kick against her ribs. Xavier, the door burst open and Davy rushed in with his band mates, all of them soaked and laughing. The moment shattered and Xavier stepped back behind the professional distance he always maintained. But for the rest of the night, Harper felt the weight of his gaze, the unspoken words that hummed between them like a bass line. After that night, things were different. Xavier started arriving earlier, leaving later. He began helping Harper with small tasks, fixing the wobbly table leg he had been sitting at for weeks, troubleshooting the temperamental sound system with the expertise of someone who had spent time around musicians. He never overstepped, never made her feel incapable, but his presence became a steady comfort she had not realized she was craving. They talked more, conversations that stretched during breaks and after the musicians packed up. Harper learned that Xavier had grown up in the same neighborhood where the Blue Note now struggled to survive. His father had been a session musician, who never quite made it big but loved the music too much to quit. His mother had worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, teaching Xavier the value of hard work and the importance of community. "She died 2 years ago," Xavier said one night, his voice rough. "Heart attack, sudden. I had just closed the biggest deal of my career, and I was going to surprise her with a house, something with a yard and a porch where she could finally rest. Xavier, I am so sorry. I spent so much time building the business, proving I could make something of myself, that I forgot to just be with her." He looked down at his hands. "That is when I stopped going out, stopped trying to network and schmooze and play the game. Friday nights at the Blue Note, that is the only social thing I do anymore." Harper reached across the table and took his hand without thinking. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid. "She would be proud of you," Harper said. "Not because of your success, but because you are using it to do something good. You are not like other developers. I try not to be." Xavier's thumb brushed across her knuckles, a touch so gentle it made her shiver. "My father always said that jazz is about listening, really listening to the other musicians and finding your place in the conversation. I think building communities should work the same way." They sat like that, hands linked across the table, until Davy loudly cleared his throat from the stage. Harper pulled away, flustered, but Xavier was smiling, and the warmth in his eyes promised more conversations, more moments like this. The next Friday, Harper decided she needed to address the elephant in the room. She had been letting Xavier pay for every table for nearly 3 months now, and while the money had saved the Blue Note from certain closure, it felt wrong. Like she was taking advantage of his generosity and whatever was growing between them. She waited until he arrived, then immediately walked over to his table. "We need to talk about the reservations," she said without preamble. Xavier looked up, his expression carefully neutral. "All right. You cannot keep buying out the entire bar every week. It is too much." "It is my money to spend how I choose. Xavier, please. I appreciate it more than you know, but this is not sustainable, and it is not fair to you." "Fair to me." He set down his glass. "Harper, these Friday nights are the only things keeping me sane. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find a place where you can just exist without performance or expectation? But you are alone every week. You should be sharing the music with other people, not sitting in an empty bar." Xavier was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was low and intense. "I am not alone. You are here. Davy and the band are here. That is enough." "Is it?" Harper challenged. "Or are you hiding?" The words came out harsher than she intended, but she saw them land. Xavier's jaw tightened. "Maybe I am," he said finally. "Maybe after spending my days negotiating with people who only see dollar signs, after watching my father die broke and my mother work herself into an early grave, Maybe I want one place where things are simple, where I can just listen to good music in a place that matters." "The Blue Note will always welcome you," Harper said softly, "but please stop buying out all the tables. Let other people come. Let this place breathe the way it is supposed to." Xavier studied her face for a long moment. "On one condition." "What?" "Have dinner with me." "Not here, not during a Friday night set. Somewhere where we can actually talk without musicians and interruptions." Harper's heart stuttered. "Is that what this has all been about? You buying out my bar so you could ask me out?" "No," Xavier said firmly. "I bought out your bar because I genuinely needed the space and the peace. But have I been hoping for the courage to ask you to dinner? Yes, every single week." Harper felt a smile break across her face, unstoppable. "Tuesday. I am closed Mondays and Tuesdays." "Tuesday," Xavier agreed, and his answering smile transformed his entire face. That night, Xavier released all the future Friday reservations except his own single table. Harper immediately opened the bookings, and within hours, her regular customers were flooding back, thrilled that the Blue Note was accessible again. Several of them asked about the mysterious man who had been booking every table, and Harper just smiled and said he was a jazz enthusiast. She did not tell them he was a millionaire. She did not tell them about the real estate empire or the business magazines that called him a visionary, because that was not the Xavier she knew. The Xavier she knew fixed wobbly tables and listened to music with his eyes closed and talked about his parents with a tenderness that made her chest ache. Tuesday arrived too slowly and too fast. Harper changed her outfit 6 times before settling on a deep blue dress that her grandmother had given her years ago. She met Xavier at a small Italian restaurant in a neighborhood she did not usually frequent, the kind of place with white tablecloths and soft lighting and prices that made her wince. But Xavier did not take her there to impress her with money. He took her there because the owner was a family friend, someone who had known his father, and the food was made with the kind of love that reminded him of home. They talked for 3 hours. Harper learned about Xavier's childhood dreams of being an architect, how he had slowly morphed into development because he wanted to see entire communities transformed. Xavier learned about Harper's brief stint as a music teacher, how she had left a stable job to buy the Blue Note when her grandmother could no longer run it. "Everyone thought I was crazy," Harper admitted over tiramisu they were sharing. "A black woman with no business experience buying a failing jazz bar in a rough neighborhood. Even my parents thought I was throwing my life away." "Were they right?" Xavier asked. "Some days I think so. But then I have a night where the music is perfect and the crowd is feeling it, and I remember why places like the Blue Note matter. Jazz was born out of struggle and survival. It deserves venues that understand that." "You are remarkable," Xavier said, and the way he looked at her made Harper feel like the most important person in the world. They started dating, though that word felt too small for what was happening between them. Xavier still came to the Blue Note every Friday, but now he sat at a full table surrounded by other jazz enthusiasts, and Harper would catch his eye across the room and feel warmth spread through her entire body. They had dinner on Tuesdays, long meals that stretched into the evening. Xavier started inviting Harper to see his projects, walking her through buildings in various stages of renovation, explaining his vision for spaces that honored their history while creating sustainable futures. "This used to be a textile factory," he explained one Saturday afternoon, standing in a gutted industrial space with soaring ceilings. 150 women worked here in the 40s and 50s. I want to convert it into affordable artist studios and small business incubators. Keep the bones, honor the history, give it new life." Harper walked through the space, running her hands along brick walls that still held the marks of their previous life. How do you do it? Balance the business side with the soul side. With difficulty, Xavier admitted. I have investors who only care about returns. I have community members who do not trust anyone who looks like me coming into their neighborhood. It is a constant negotiation. Sounds exhausting. It is. He moved closer, taking her hand. That is why I need the blue note, need you. You remind me why I started doing this in the first place. Harper kissed him then, standing in that gutted factory with dust motes floating through afternoon sunlight. Xavier kissed her back with a gentleness that made her knees weak, his hands cradling her face like she was something precious. They took things slow, neither of them wanting to rush something that felt this important. Xavier met Harper's best friend, Simone, who grilled him like a detective and then grudgingly approved. Harper met Xavier's business partner, Marcus, who pulled her aside and told her that he had not seen Xavier this happy in years. But it was not all smooth. Harper struggled with the imbalance in their financial situations. Xavier thought nothing of suggesting nice restaurants or weekend trips, never flaunting his wealth but clearly comfortable with a lifestyle Harper could not match. I cannot afford this, she finally said one evening when Xavier suggested they fly to New Orleans for a jazz festival. I know. I would pay. Xavier, I cannot let you do that. Why not? Because I need to be able to contribute equally. Xavier set down the wine glass he had been holding and looked at her seriously. Harper, I understand your pride. I respect it. But relationships are not about splitting everything 50-50 down to the penny. They are about giving what you can and accepting what is offered. You give me peace and perspective and purpose. Let me give you a plane ticket. It feels like charity. It is not charity. It is me wanting to share experiences with the woman I am falling in love with. The words hung in the air. Harper felt her breath catch. You are falling in love with me. Yes, Xavier said simply. I have been falling since that first night when you asked why I bought out all the tables, and you looked at me like I was a puzzle you intended to solve. Harper felt tears prick her eyes. I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me. Good, Xavier said, pulling her into his arms. Anything worth having should be a little terrifying. They went to New Orleans. Harper had never been, could never afford it, and Xavier delighted in showing her the city through the lens of music. They spent 3 days wandering from club to club, listening to jazz and blues and funk, eating beignets at 3 in the morning and dancing in streets that smelled like magnolias and possibility. On their last night, sitting in a tiny club where a woman sang torch songs that could break your heart, Xavier leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for taking a chance on me. Thank you for buying out every table at my bar until I had to come ask you why," Harper whispered back, and they both laughed. But when they returned to reality, problems were waiting. The Blue Note's landlord, a property management company that had been mostly hands-off for years, suddenly informed Harper that they were not renewing her lease. The building had been sold, and the new owners wanted to redevelop the entire block. Harper was devastated. She had poured everything into the Blue Note, and now it was being ripped away. Xavier was furious on her behalf, immediately offering to buy the building himself, but Harper refused. I cannot let you do that. This needs to be something I build, not something you rescue. Harper, please be reasonable. No, you be reasonable. If I let you swoop in and save my business with your money, then what have I actually accomplished? I will just be the woman dating a millionaire who fixed all her problems. They fought, voices rising in Harper's tiny apartment until her neighbors pounded on the wall. Xavier left, and Harper cried into her pillow, feeling the weight of losing both her business and potentially the man she loved. But Xavier was not done. He spent the next week digging into the property sale, using his connections and expertise to uncover the details. The building had been sold to a development company known for predatory practices, buying up properties in transitioning neighborhoods and flipping them for maximum profit with no regard for existing tenants or community impact. He called Harper. "Meet me at the Blue Note tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, and bring Davy and any other musicians who care about the place." When Harper arrived, she found Xavier standing outside with Marcus and a woman she did not recognize, a sharp-dressed lawyer with an impressive briefcase. "What is going on?" Harper asked. "We are going to save the Blue Note," Xavier said, "but not by me buying the building, by creating a community land trust." He explained his plan. The community land trust would purchase the building and several others on the block, taking them out of the speculative market permanently. The Blue Note would have a secure, long-term lease at an affordable rate. Other small businesses in danger of displacement would have the same opportunity. "I am not doing this alone," Xavier emphasized. "We need community buy-in, fundraising, grants, the whole works. I will contribute and help organize, but this has to be something the neighborhood builds together." Harper stared at him, tears streaming down her face. "You did this for me. I did this for everyone," Xavier said quietly. "For your grandmother and my father and every artist and business owner trying to survive in a city that keeps pushing them out. But yes, I also did it for you, because you were right. You need to build something yourself, so let me help you build something bigger than either of us." The next 3 months were chaos. Harper threw herself into the Community Land Trust project, attending meetings and organizing fundraisers and rallying support. Xavier worked behind the scenes, navigating the legal and financial complexities, using his reputation and connections to open doors. They worked side by side, and Harper fell even more deeply in love watching Xavier operate. He never talked down to people, never flaunted his expertise. He listened, collaborated, and gave credit to the community members doing the groundwork. The Blue Note stayed open through all of it, becoming headquarters for the land trust efforts. Friday nights transformed into planning sessions followed by jazz sets, the music fueling their determination. Davy and the other musicians threw benefit concerts. Simone organized a bake sale that raised $3,000. The neighborhood came together in a way Harper had never seen. Everyone invested in protecting the places that mattered to them, and through it all, Xavier was there, not as a savior or a sugar daddy, but as a partner. He and Harper fought and made up and fought again. They learned each other's working styles, their stress responses, their breaking points. They learned how to be a team. 6 months after Harper first confronted Xavier about buying out all the tables, the Community Land Trust successfully purchased the building that housed the Blue Note along with 4 other properties on the block. It was a community victory, celebrated with a massive block party featuring local musicians, food, and a joy that felt hard-won and real. Harper stood in the middle of the celebration, watching her neighborhood dance and eat and exist in a space they had fought to preserve, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Xavier found her in the crowd, pulled her close, and kissed her forehead. "You did it," he murmured against her hair. "We did it," Harper corrected. "Okay, we did it. Now can I ask you something without you accusing me of trying to rescue you?" Harper pulled back to look at him, noting the nervous energy radiating off him. "What?" Xavier took a breath. "Move in with me." "My place, your place, a new place, I do not care. I just want to wake up with you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night." "Xavier, I know we have only been together 6 months. I know there are 1,000 practical reasons to wait. But Harper, I have never been more sure of anything. I love you. I love your passion and your stubbornness and the way you fight for what matters. I want to build a life with you." Harper looked at this man who had walked into her struggling jazz bar and quietly upended her entire world. This man who had seen her at her most stressed and vulnerable and loved her anyway. This man who understood that true partnership meant supporting without smothering, helping without controlling. "Yes," she said, "but we are getting a place together, something that is ours. Equal investment." Xavier laughed, bright and joyful. "Deal. As long as it has space for your grandmother's record collection and a kitchen big enough for your jambalaya." They found a loft in the same neighborhood as the Blue Note, a converted warehouse with exposed brick and huge windows that let in morning light. They moved in together on a rainy Saturday, Marcus and Simone helping them haul boxes up 3 flights of stairs because the elevator was broken. Harper set up her turntable in the living room, and that night they christened the space by dancing to Coltrane at 2 in the morning, laughing and exhausted and perfectly happy. Life settled into a rhythm that felt right. Harper ran the Blue Note with renewed energy, the security of the land trust lifting a weight she had not realized she was carrying. She expanded the programming, adding weeknight shows and jazz education workshops for neighborhood kids. Xavier continued his development work, but now he came home to Harper every night, trading stories about their days over dinner. They traveled together, Xavier introducing Harper to jazz scenes in different cities. Harper introduced Xavier to her family, a huge sprawling network of aunts and uncles and cousins who gathered every month for dinners that lasted hours. Xavier fit in seamlessly, charming Harper's mother with his earnest appreciation for her cooking and winning over her father with his genuine interest in the older man's stories about working as a union organizer. "He is good people," Harper's father told her one evening, pulling her aside during a family barbecue. "Rare to find someone with money who has not let it make him mean." 2 years passed in a blur of music and work and building a life together. The Blue Note thrived, becoming a destination for jazz lovers from across the city. Xavier's development projects garnered national attention, held up as a model for ethical urban renewal. But the best moments were still the small ones: Friday nights listening to music, lazy Sunday mornings in bed, arguing about whose turn it was to do dishes. On a Tuesday evening in October, Harper arrived home from the Blue Note to find candles everywhere. Xavier had cooked dinner, something he rarely did because his skills in the kitchen were questionable at best. The table was set with flowers and wine, and soft jazz played in the background. "What is all this?" Harper asked, setting down her bag. "A Tuesday date night," Xavier said, pulling out her chair. "We have not had one in a while." They ate, talked about their days, the conversation flowing as easily as it always did. But Harper could sense Xavier's nerves, the way he kept fidgeting with his napkin. "Okay, what is going on?" she finally asked. "You have been weird all evening." Xavier laughed, a slightly shaky sound. "I am that obvious? You are terrible at keeping secrets from me." "Good to know." He stood, then dropped to one knee beside her chair, pulling a small box from his pocket. "Harper Hayes, you walked into my life on a random Friday when I needed someone to remind me what actually matters. You challenged me, supported me, loved me even when I was being impossible. You are my favorite person, my best friend, my home. Will you marry me?" Harper was crying before he finished talking. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." The ring was perfect, a simple band with a small diamond, elegant and understated, exactly her style. Xavier slipped it onto her finger with shaking hands, and then he was kissing her, both of them laughing and crying. They got married 6 months later in the Blue Note, surrounded by family and friends and the music that had brought them together. Davy played during the ceremony, and Harper's cousin sang at last, and there was not a dry eye in the house. Xavier cried through his vows, which he had written himself, promising to always listen to her with the same attention he gave to his father's jazz records. Harper promised to be patient with his tendency to try to fix everything, to remind him when to step back and let things unfold. They promised to keep having Tuesday dinners and Friday jazz nights, to never stop making each other laugh, to build something together that honored both their dreams. The reception lasted until 3 in the morning, the party spilling out into the street as neighbors joined the celebration. Harper danced with her father, with Xavier, with Davy and Simone and Marcus, and everyone who had helped them fight for the Blue Note and the Community Land Trust. At some point in the chaos, she found herself standing outside with Xavier, taking a breath of cool night air. Music floated out from the bar, laughter and voices blending into a symphony of joy. "How did we get here?" Harper asked, leaning into Xavier's side. "You came out and asked why I kept buying every table," Xavier said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best question you ever asked. Best investment you ever made, without question." They stood there, wrapped around each other, listening to the music and the celebration of their community, their family, their life together. Inside the Blue Note, someone started playing Take 5, and Xavier pulled Harper into a slow dance right there on the sidewalk. "I love you," Harper murmured. "I love you too," Xavier said. "Every Friday, every Tuesday, every moment in between." Years later, when people asked how they met, Harper would say that a millionaire walked into her jazz bar and bought out every table every week until she finally came out to ask why. And Xavier would add that the best decision he ever made was choosing to listen to music in a tiny venue that believed jazz deserved spaces with soul. Their story became neighborhood legend, told and retold with varying degrees of accuracy, but the core remained true. They had found each other in a place that mattered, built something that lasted, and filled their lives with music and love and purpose. The Blue Note became their legacy. Harper and Xavier eventually bought the building outright through the land trust, ensuring it could never be sold or redeveloped. They established a foundation that provided grants to other small music venues fighting to survive. They created a residency program for young jazz musicians, giving them a space to develop their craft and a supportive community to nurture their talent. Xavier scaled back his development work, focusing on projects that aligned with their values, always prioritizing community input and preservation of cultural spaces. Harper expanded the Blue Note's reach, creating a recording label that documented the incredible talent flowing through their stage. Together, they became advocates for arts funding and urban planning that centered the needs of artists and small business owners. 3 years into their marriage, Harper discovered she was pregnant. They had talked about having children, both wanting a family but in no rush. The pregnancy was a surprise but a welcome one, and Xavier was beside himself with joy and terror in equal measure. Their daughter was born on a Friday in April. 8 pounds of pure determination with Harper's eyes and Xavier's stubborn chin. They named her Melody, after the music that had brought them together, and she came home from the hospital to a loft filled with flowers and well wishes from the entire neighborhood. Parenthood was chaos and joy and exhaustion. Xavier proved to be a natural, taking to midnight feedings and diaper changes with the same methodical focus he brought to development projects. Harper learned to run the Blue Note while managing the fog of new motherhood, grateful for a community that rallied around them with meals and babysitting and endless support. Melody's first outing was to the Blue Note when she was 3 weeks old, sleeping in a carrier strapped to Xavier's chest while Davy played a lullaby-paced version of Summertime. It became tradition, Friday nights as a family, Melody growing up with jazz as her soundtrack. 2 years later, their son arrived, a surprise pregnancy that made them laugh at their inability to plan anything. They named him Davis, after Miles Davis, and he proved to be the opposite of his sister in every way. Where Melody was focused and serious, Davis was pure chaos and joy, laughing at everything and sleeping through nothing. Their loft transformed into organized mayhem, filled with toys and children's books and the constant noise of family life. But on Friday nights, they still went to the Blue Note, the kids treated like royalty by the musicians and regular customers who had watched this love story unfold. Harper's parents moved closer, wanting to be near their grandchildren. Xavier's business partner Marcus got married and had kids of his own, and their families merged into one sprawling, loud, loving unit. Simone became the godmother to both children, taking her role so seriously that she had emergency bags packed at her apartment for spontaneous sleepovers. The Blue Note continued to thrive, outlasting the trendy clubs and corporate venues that came and went. It became an institution, written up in national jazz magazines and travel guides as a must-visit destination. But it never lost its soul, never sacrificed authenticity for growth. Harper made sure of that, keeping ticket prices accessible, maintaining the mismatched furniture and the slightly temperamental sound system that was now held together with new electrical tape, but still just as much prayer. Xavier's mother would have loved all of it, Harper thought sometimes. The grandchildren she never got to meet, the life her son had built, the way he had honored his father's love of music. They visited her grave regularly, Xavier telling her about Melody's first piano recital, Davis's insistence on dancing to every song he heard, the way Harper had transformed the Blue Note into something beyond either of them had imagined. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they renewed their vows at the Blue Note, surrounded by family and friends and a decade of shared history. Melody and Davis stood as witnesses, serious in their fancy clothes. Harper and Xavier promised all the same things they had 10 years earlier, but with the weight of actual experience behind the words. "I promise to keep buying out tables if that is what it takes to spend time with you," Xavier said, making everyone laugh. "I promise to keep asking why, to keep pushing you, to never let you hide behind work or walls," Harper replied. They kissed to thunderous applause, and then Davy launched into "What a Wonderful World," and the celebration began. Harper danced with Xavier, with her children, with her father, feeling the weight of gratitude that came with a life well lived. Later that night, after the party ended and the kids were asleep at her parents' house, Harper and Xavier walked through the empty Blue Note. Xavier fixed a wobbly chair, habit after years of small maintenance tasks. Harper straightened the photos on the wall, images documenting a decade of performances and community events. "You ever think about that first Friday?" Xavier asked. "When I walked in here with my ridiculous plan to buy out every table, all the time," Harper admitted. "I thought you were the strangest, most frustrating customer I had ever encountered. And now you are the strangest, most frustrating husband I could have ever hoped for." Xavier laughed, pulling her into his arms. They swayed together in the empty bar, no music except the echo of 10 years of Friday nights, of love that had grown in a space dedicated to authentic expression. "Thank you," Xavier murmured. "For what?" "For coming out that night and asking why. For seeing past the money and the weird behavior to whatever was underneath. For building this life with me." Harper pulled back to look at him, this man who had changed everything. "Thank you for buying every table until I had no choice but to notice you, for understanding what the Blue Note meant. For loving me and this community and our weird little life. They stood there, holding each other in the bar where it all began, and Harper thought about the journey that had brought them here. The struggle and the triumph, the fights and the makeups, the endless Friday nights filled with music and meaning. She thought about her grandmother, who had first taught her to love jazz, and Xavier's father, who had played saxophone in clubs just like this one. She thought about the community they had helped preserve, the children they were raising, the legacy they were building together. Outside, the city hummed with life, the neighborhood changing and evolving while holding onto the spaces that mattered. Inside the Blue Note, Harper and Xavier danced in the darkness, grateful for every strange twist that had led them to each other, every choice that had brought them to this moment. The Blue Note would continue long after they were gone. They had made sure of that. But for now, it was theirs, a testament to the power of asking questions, taking chances, and believing that love could grow in unexpected places. Harper had asked why a millionaire kept buying every table at her tiny jazz bar, and the answer had changed her entire life. It was the best question she ever asked. And Xavier's answer, given not in words but in action over years of Friday nights and Tuesday dinners, and building something beautiful together, was still the best thing she had ever heard.